It sucks. Why? I mean, at least I make it cool. Pimp Kabbalah is sick, but it's still boring as fuck. What's not? Talking about aliens, but we'll get there. Maybe. Not now. So, what are we studying today, Rabbi? Stupid ass bullshit. Like what? I don't know. Let's learn about Shabbatai Zvi. Because he sucks. Does he? What would you tell him right now? Dog, what? That's what I would say. All right. Shabbatai Zvi, Hebrew. Shabbatai Zvi, August 1st, 1626 to around September 17th, 1676, was an Ottoman former Jewish mystic and rabbi from Smyrna who converted to Islam. His family were Romaniote Jews from Patras. All right, so here's what he looks like. He sucks. Um, he wore a kaftan in 1669 allegedly. So he was born August 1st, 1626 in Smyrna, Ottoman Empire. Modern Izmir, Turkey. Died around September 17th, 1676, around age 50 in Usini, Ottoman Empire. Modern Montenegro. Nationality Ottoman. Religion Judaism, later Islam. Founder of Sabbatianism. Active throughout the Ottoman Empire, Zvi claimed to be the long-awaited Jewish Messiah and founded the Sabbatian movement. Central to his teachings was the belief that during the Messianic age, acts traditionally considered sinful would transform into righteous ones. This antinomian doctrine led Zvi and his followers to deliberately violate Jewish commandments, a controversial practice that later inspired movements like the Frankists. Upon arriving in Constantinople in February 1666, Sabbatai was imprisoned on the order of the Grand Vizier Kopluzaid Fazil Ahmad Pasha. In September of that same year, after being moved from different prisons around the capital to the imperial court seat in Adrianople, now Edirne, he was judged on accusations of fomenting sedition. Sabbatai was given the choice of death or conversion to Islam by the Grand Vizier, representing Sultan Mehmed IV. He chose conversion, donning the Islamic turban, and from then on, the heads of the Ottoman state rewarded him with a generous pension for complying with their political and religious plans. About 300 families who followed Zvi also converted to Islam and became known as the Donma, Turkish for converts. Subsequently, the Ottomans banished him twice, with the first Subsequently, the Ottomans banished him twice, first with Constantinople, and when he was heard singing psalms with Jews there, to a small town known today as Okinj in what is now Montenegro. He died in isolation. Early life and education. Also, Sabbatai building in the Agora of Smyrna, where Shabbatai Zvi supposedly lived. Sabbatai was born in the Ottoman city of Smyrna, allegedly on Tish B'Av, one of Judaism's fast days, during the 3 weeks in 1626. In Hebrew, Shabbatai means Saturn. In Jewish tradition, the reign of Sabbatai, the highest planet, was often linked to the advent of the Messiah. Zvi, Zvi's family were Roman Neo-Jews from Patras. Mordechai was during the Ottoman-Venetian Wars. Smyrna became the center of Levantine trade, and Mordechai became the Smyrna agent of an English trading house, achieving some wealth in the process. His sister Oragadol was a learned woman in her own right, well known among the Jews of Smyrna. Following the prevailing Jewish custom of the time, Sabbatai's father had him study the Talmud. He attended a yeshiva under the chief rabbi of Smyrna, Joseph Escapa. Studies in halakha, Jewish law, appealed to him, but Zvi did attain proficiency in the Talmud. At the same time, he was fascinated by mysticism and Kabbalah, and was influenced by Isaac Luria, practical Kabbalah, whose devotees used asceticism to communicate with God and the angels to predict the future and perform miracles, was especially appealing to him. As well as Luria's writings, he read the Zohar, Hausler, and practiced asceticism and Kabbalistic purification exercises called Tukkunim. Personal history, influence on English millenarianism. During the first half of the 17th century, millenarian ideas about the approach of the Messianic age were popular. They included ideas about the redemption of the Jews and their return to the land of Israel with independent sovereignty. The apocalyptic year was identified by other authorities as 1666, and millenarianism was widespread in England. This belief was so prevalent that Manasseh ben Israel, in his letter to Oliver Cromwell and the Rump Parliament, appealed to it as a reason to readmit Jews into England, saying, "The opinions of many other people do concur herein, that both believe that the restoring time of our nation into their native country is very near at hand. As Sabbatai's father was the agent for an English trading house in Smyrna, he must have had business contacts with English people. His son may have learned something about Western millennial expectations at home. Scholars are still assessing how much influence English and Dutch Calvinist millenarianism held on messianic movements that developed around Zvi's activities. Claims to being the expected Jewish Mashiach. Along with general messianic beliefs, there was another computation based on a passage in the Zohar, a famous Jewish mystical text, that the Israelites would be redeemed by the long-awaited Mashiach in 1648. In 1640, Sabbatai announced to his followers in Smyrna that he was the anticipated messianic redeemer. To prove this, he started to pronounce God's name, an act prohibited to all but the high priest of Israel in the temple in Jerusalem on Yom Kippur. Since the temple had been destroyed in the siege of Jerusalem in 70 Common Era, this act was highly symbolic. Shabbatai also claimed he could fly, but told his followers that he could not do so publicly because they were not worthy enough to witness it. He also claimed to have visions of God. Shabbatai revealed his claim to being the Mashiach early on to Isaac Silveria and Moses Pinheiro, and the later grandfather of the Italian Rabbi Joseph Bass. However, at 22, Shabbatai was still too young to be considered an established rabbinic authority. His influence in the local community was limited, even though he had of led the pious life of a mystic and for several years. The older, more established rabbinic leadership was suspicious of his activities, and the local college of rabbis, headed by his teacher Joseph Escapa, they watched him. When his messianic pretensions became too bold, he and his followers were subjected to an edict of herem, a type of excommunication in Judaism. In about 1651, now 1654, the rabbis banished Shabbatai and his disciples from Smyrna. It is uncertain where he went from there, but by 1658 he surfaced in Constantinople. There he met a preacher, Abraham Yachini, a disciple of the Talmudic scholar Joseph Trani, who confirmed his messianic mission. Yachani is said to have forged a manuscript in archaic characters and attested to Shabbatai's claim to be the Mashiach. It was entitled "The Great Wisdom of Solomon" and began, was confronted. Abraham was confined in a cave for 40 years, and I wondered greatly that the time of miracles did not arrive. Then was heard a voice proclaiming, "A son will be born in the Hebrew year 5386, the year 1626 of the Common Era, to Mordechai Zvi, and he will be called Shabbatai. He will humble the great dragon. He, the true Messiah, will sit upon my throne." In Salonika, Cairo, and Jerusalem. The Yeni Mosque, Thessaloniki, built by the Donma community during the late Ottoman period. Equipped with this document, Shabbatai chose Salonika, which was then a hub of Kabbalistic dialogue, as his base. He proclaimed himself the Mashiach or Anointed One, and attracted a large following by various a large following by hosting various mystical events. For instance, he celebrated his marriage to the Torah, referring to it as the one without end, the Ein Sof, and organized a solemn festival to which he invited his friends. However, the rabbis of Salonika, led by Abraham de Botton, expelled him from the city. Reports vary on the subsequent movements. Alexandria, Athens, Constantinople, Jerusalem, and Smyrna mentioned as possible temporary bases he might have taken. Eventually, he settled in Cairo, and where he lived for about 2 years, 1660 to 1662. There, he befriended Raphael Yosef Halabi, a wealthy and influential Jew who held the high position of mint master and tax farmer in Ottoman Cairo. Raphael Joseph led an ascetic life, which included fasting, bathing in cold water, and scourging himself at night. He used his great wealth for charity, supporting poor Talmudists and Kabbalists, 50 of whom reportedly regularly dined at his table. He became a supporter and promoter of Sabbatai's messianic claims. In approximately 1663, Sabbatai moved to Jerusalem, where he resumed his former ascetic practices of frequently fasting and other penances. Many saw this as proof of extraordinary piety. He was said to have a good voice and attract large audiences when he sang psalms all night long or Spanish love songs, to which he gave mystical interpretations. At other times, he prayed and cried at the graves of pious men and women, or distributed confection to children on the streets. Gradually, he gathered a large circle of adherents. At the same time, the Jewish community in Jerusalem was desperately in need of money to pay the heavy taxes levied by the Ottoman government. Known as the favorite of the rich and powerful, Raphael Joseph Halabi, Sabbatai was chosen to appeal to him for money and support. His success in securing the funds to pay off the Ottomans raised his prestige. His followers dated his public career from his journey to Cairo. Marriage to Sarah. Another significant event during his second stay in Cairo contributed to Shabbatai's reputation in the Jewish community. During the Helminsky uprising in Poland, a young Jewish orphan named Sarah was discovered by other people and sent to a convent for care. After 10 years, at around 16, she escaped, claiming it was and made her way to Amsterdam. Subsequently, she traveled to Livorno, where reports indicated that she led a life of prostitution, while also embracing the belief that she would become the bride of Mashiach, whose arrival was thought to be imminent. When a report of her adventures reached Cairo, Shabbatai claimed that such a consort had been promised to him in a dream because he, as Mashiach, was bound to fall in love with an unchaste woman. He reportedly sent messengers to Livorno to bring Sarah to him, and they were married at Halabai's house. Her beauty and eccentricity reportedly helped him gain new followers. Through her, a new romantic and licentious element entered Shabbatai's career. The overturning of her past life was interpreted by Shabbatai's followers as further confirmation of Messiahship. Following the biblical story of the prophet Hosea, who had also been commanded to take a wife of whoredom as the first symbolic act of calling, Nathan of Gaza. With Halabi's financial and political backing, a charming wife, and many additional followers, Shabbatai returned to Jerusalem in triumph. Passing through the city of Gaza, which at the time had an important Jewish community, he met Nathan Benjamin Levy, who known since as Nathan HaAza, who became very active in Shabbatai's messianic career, serving as the right-hand man and declaring himself to the to be the risen Elijah, who is predicted would proclaim the arrival of Mashiach. In 1665, Nathan announced that the Messianic age would begin in 1666 with the conquest of the world without bloodshed. Mashiach would then lead the 10 lost tribes back to the Holy Land, riding on a lion with a seven-headed dragon in its jaws. Rabbis of Jerusalem viewed Shabbatai with great suspicion and threatened his followers with execution. Acknowledging that Jerusalem was not the best place to carry out his plan, Shabbatai left for his native Smyrna. Nathan proclaimed that henceforth Gaza, rather than Jerusalem, would be the sacred city. On his way from Jerusalem to Smyrna, Shabbatai was greeted enthusiastically in Aleppo. In Smyrna, which he reached in the autumn of 1665, great homage was paid to him. After some hesitation, he declared himself to be the expected Mashiach during Rosh Hashanah in 1665. His declaration was made in Shul with the blowing of shofars and loud shouts of "Long live our King, our Mashiach." His followers then began to refer to him as Amira, a Hebrew acronym for the phrase "Our Lord and King, the Majesty be exalted." We should have said that. Okay, our Lord and King, His Majesty be exalted. The A word, Malkenu Yerim Hodu, but not the whole A word, just like Adon and then Enu and then Malkenu. Okay. Proclaim Mashiach. Shabbatai to be enthroned. Image from the Amsterdam Jewish publication, 1666. Oh fuck! Look at these hands like Jerry Rice girls. All right, that's what it looks like. Zoom in if you want. I'm not fucking taking it over. Okay, you fucks. There you go. I know you can't see it. I don't give a fuck. Shabbatai, assisted by his wife, became the community leader and used his power to crush any opposition. He deposed the existing Rabbi of Smyrna, Aharon Lapapa, and appointed Chaim ben Venist to his place. Italy, Germany, and the Netherlands were already centers of his messianic movement, and the Jews of Hamburg and Amsterdam learned of the events in Smyrna from other peeps. Henry Oldenburg, a German savant who became the first secretary of the Royal Society, wrote to Baruch Spinoza, Spinozae Epistolae number 33, all the world here is talking of a rumor of the return of the Israelites to their own country. Should the news be confirmed, it may bring about a revolution of all things. Shabbatai's followers soon included many prominent rabbis, such as Isaac Aboab da Fonseca, Moses Raphael de Aguilar, Moshe ben Jonathan Galante, Moses ben Mordechai Zacuto, and Chaim ben Iste. Benjamin Musafira, an adherent of Spinoza, also became a follower. Meanwhile, fantastic reports circulated and were widely believed. For example, it had said in the north of Scotland, a ship had appeared with silken sails and ropes, manned by sailors who spoke Hebrew. The flag bore the inscription, "The 12 Tribes of Israel." The Jewish community of Avignon, France, prepared to emigrate to the New Kingdom in the spring of 1666. Jewish readiness to believe Shabbatai Tzvi's messianic claims may largely be explained by the desperate state of European Jewry in the mid-17th century. The bloody pogroms of the Kalemsky uprising was wiped out. Uprising had wiped out an estimated 10 to 20,000 Jews in Eastern Europe and destroyed many centers of Jewish learning and communal life. Spread of Shabbatai Tzvi's influence. Probably with his consent, Shabbatai's adherents planned to abolish most of the halakha in an act of antinomianism. Antinomianism is against law, is a term used to describe any view which rejects laws or legalism and argues against moral, religious, or social mores. Okay, this included the commandments because, according to a minority opinion in the Talmud, in the Messianic age, there would no longer be holy obligations. The fast of the 10th of Tevet became a day of feasting and rejoicing. In contrast to this viewpoint, Maoz Kahana demonstrated that Shabbatai himself did not aim to alter the entirety of halakha, but instead sought to modify specific aspects of it. Furthermore, each of these modifications was justified by halakhic rationale. Samuel Primo, who became Shabbatai's secretary when he went to Smyrna, directed the following circular to all the Jews in the name of Mashiach, the first begotten son of Hashem. Shabbatai be Mashiach and Redeemer of the people of Israel, to all the sons of Israel. Peace. Since ye have been deemed worthy to behold the great day from the fulfillment of God's word by the prophets, your lament and sorrow must be changed into joy, and your fasting into merriment. For you weep no more, rejoice with song and melody, and change the day formerly spent in sadness and sorrow into a day of jubilee, because I have appeared. It was considered blasphemous because Shabbatai wanted to celebrate his birthday rather than observe the significant holy day of mourning, Tisha B'Av. There was outrage and dissensions in the communities, where many leaders sympathetic to the movement were shocked by radical innovations. Shlomo Nisim Al-Ghazi, a prominent Talmudist of Smyrna, and other members of the rabbinate who opposed the abolition of the fast narrowly escaped death at the hands of Shabbatai's followers. Dog, this shit sucks. Are we done? There's so in Constantinople. Istanbul, Constantinople was Byzantium. At the beginning of 1666, Shabbatai left Smyrna for Constantinople, possibly forced out by city officials, since Nathan of Gaza had prophesied that once in Constantinople, Shabbatai would place the Sultan's crown on his head. The Grand Vizier Kubolazde Fazil Ahmed Pasha ordered Shabbatai's immediate arrest and had him imprisoned, maybe to avoid any doubts as to the power still wielded by the Sultanate. However, his imprisonment discouraged neither Shabbatai nor his followers. He was treated well in prison, perhaps due to bribes, which strengthened his followers' belief in him. Meanwhile, Nathan of Gaza, Abraham Yalkini, and others circulated reports of Mashiach's miraculous uh, activities in the Ottoman capital and messianic expectations in the Jewish diaspora continued to rise. At Abydos, Migdal Az. After 2 months' imprisonment in Constantinople, Shabbatai was moved to the castle at Abydos Pont, accompanied by some of his friends. The Sabbateans then renamed the fortress Migdal Az Tower of Strength. As Shabbatai had arrived on the day preceding Passover, he slew a paschal lamb for himself and his followers and ate it with its fat, a violation of halakha. He is said to have pronounced over it the benediction, "Blessed be God who restored that which was forbidden." The immense sums to him by his rich followers, the charms of the queenly Sarah, and the cooperation shown by the Ottoman officials and others enabled Shabbatai to show off almost royal splendor in prison at Abydos. Accounts of his life there were exaggerated and spread among Jews in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and in some parts of Europe. Jews began to prepare for a new exodus. In almost every shul, Shabbatai's initials were posted. Prayers for him were inserted in the following form: "Blessed are Thing and King, and other and the holy and righteous Shabbatai be the Messiah and the God of Yaakov." In Hamburg, the council introduced the custom of praying for Shabbatai not only on Shabbat but also on Monday and Thursday. Unbelievers were compelled to remain in the synagogue and join the prayer with a loud amen. Shabbatai was printed with that of King David in most prayer books, along with his Kabbalistic formulas and penances. Such innovations caused great commotion in some communities. In Monrovia, excitement reached such a pitch that the government had to intervene, while at Saleh, Morocco, the emir ordered a persecution of the Jews. During this period, Shabbatai declared that fast on the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, his birthday, would henceforth be feast days, and contemplated converting Yom Kippur to a day of celebration. Nehemiah HaKohen, Shabbatai's as a prisoner in the castle of Abydos. There you go. I'm not. Fuck you. While Sabbatai was while Sabbatai, so that's a picture of Sabbatai Zvi as a prisoner in the castle of Abydos. While Sabbatai was in Abydos prison, an incident ultimately led to his downfall. Polish Jewish communities, hearing of Shabbatai's messianic claims, sent the Kabbalist Nehemiah HaKohen to interview him in his captivity. Nehemiah reached Abydos after a journey of 3 months at the beginning of September 1666. The meeting did not go well. Nehemiah declared Shabbatai an impostor. Some Sabbateans are said to have contemplated murdering Nehemiah as a rival. Conversion to Islam. Nehemiah, however, escaped to Constantinople, where he pretended to embrace Islam to get an audience with the Kaymakam to tell him of Shabbatai's ambitions. The Kaymakam informed Sultan Mehmed IV. Shabbatai was removed from Abydos and taken to Adrianople, where the vizier gave him three choices: subject himself to a trial of his divinity in the form of a volley of arrows. Should the archers miss, his divinity would be proven, be impaled, or convert to Islam. On the following day, September 16, 1666, Zvi appeared before the Sultan, cast off his Jewish clothing, and put a turban on his head, thereby converting to Islam. Satisfied, the Sultan rewarded Shabbatai by conferring on him the title of Effendi and appointing him as his doorkeeper on a generous salary. Sarah and approximately 300 families among his followers also converted to Islam. Thereafter, these new Muslims were known as the Danma. Was ordered to take a second wife to confirm his conversion. Some days afterward, he wrote to the community in Smyrna, God has made me an Ishmaelite. He commanded, and it was done, the ninth day of my regeneration. Disillusionment. Former followers of Shabbatai do penance for their support of him. There you go. Shabbatai's conversion devastated his followers, and Muslims ridiculed them. Despite an apostasy, many of his adherents still believed in him, claiming that his conversion was part of the messianic scheme. Those such as Nathan of Gaza and Primo, who were interested in maintaining the movement, encouraged such belief. In many communities, the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av were still observed as feast days, despite bans and excommunications by the rabbis. At times, Shabbatai assumed the role of a pious Muslim and reviled Judaism. At others, he acted as a Jew. In March 1668, he announced that he had been filled with the Holy Spirit at Passover and had received a revelation. Either Sabbatai or his followers published a mystical work claiming he was the true Mashiach despite his conversion, and that his goal had been had was to bring thousands of Muslims to Judaism. However, he told the Sultan that he was trying to convert Jews to Islam, and the Sultan permitted him to associate with other Jews and preach in their synagogues. Last years, gradually the Turks grew tired of Shabbatai's antics and ended the doorkeeper's salary. At the beginning of 1673, the Sultan had Zvi exiled to Ochini, Delkiko, Turkish Olkum, where his wife died in 1674. Zvi then married Esther, the daughter of Rabbi Yosef Philip of Thessaloniki. Death. In August 1676, Shabbatai wrote to the Jewish community in Berat, Albania, requesting religious books. Shortly thereafter, he died in isolation. According to some accounts, on September 17, 1676, the high holy day of Yom Kippur. Under his death, his widow, brother, and children by his first wife moved to Thessaloniki. His tomb was believed to be in Berat at the Sufi Lodge built in the yard of King Mosque, Berat, Albanian Zemia e Mebreti, where a tomb stood until 1967. Research done in 1985 suggests he was buried in Dosigno. His biographer, Gershom Scholem, mentioned that the tomb was visited by Donma pilgrims from Salonika late until the early 20th century. Legacy. Statue of Shabbatai Zvi in Ulcini, Montenegro. There you go. We don't do that, kids. By the 19th century, the Dionme, these people, by the 19th century, the Donma had become prominent in the tobacco and textile trades. They established progressive schools, and some members became politically active. Many joined the Committee of Union and Progress (CUP), and the revolutionary party known as the Young Turks. With the major Donma city of Salonik now Thessaloniki, becoming part of Greece in 1912, Greece expelled the Muslims, including the from its territory, with most migrating to Turkey. This was finalized with the 1923 population exchange between Greece and Turkey. By the mid 20th century, they had become highly assimilated. Although little is known about them, various groups called Donma continue to follow Shabbatai Zvi today, mostly in Turkey. Estimates of the numbers vary. As of 2016, there are perhaps 2,000 believing Donma. Welcome. I'm in the middle of a teaching class, so just listen. Okay, so as of 2016, there are perhaps 2,000 believing Donma still living in Turkey, though this is dwarfed by the number of individuals with descent from the group. They have been described as presenting themselves as Muslim in public whilst practicing their own forms of messianic mystical Jewish beliefs in private. Some claim that Donma still play a role in Turkish politics, one of interference, particularly some political parties in Turkey like the MHP. However, others dismiss it as just whatever, pirate logic, whatever you want to call that shit. Yo, are we done? No, this shit's. What are you doing? Just resetting this bullshit. I don't know if I'm going to keep wearing tefillin as I do these classes just because I don't want to damage my tefillin. Tefillin is very expensive. Sucks. The Don eventually split into three sects, each with quite different beliefs. Ottoman Jewish scholars Abraham Danon and Joseph Nehemiah pointed out in the French language articles in the Jewish Studies Journal over 100 years ago. In the 1930s, a comprehensive study of the history of the sects was published in French by Abraham Galante. More recently, Professor Cengiz Sisman has published a new study called The Burden of Silence. According to a review published in the Israeli newspaper, the Jerusalem Post, the branch known as Caracas follow Sufi-influenced practices, while the Kapanses have not been influenced by Islam at all and are now completely secular. A house in the center of Izmir, close to the Agora, has long been associated with Shabbatai Zvi. Having been left in ruins as recently as 2015, it has since been restored to its original style. So next is Jacob Frank. Jacob Joseph Frank, born Jacob Leibowitz, 1726 to 10th of December 1791, was a Polish Jewish religious leader who claimed to be the reincarnation of the self-proclaimed Mashiach Shabbatai Zvi, 1626 to 1676, and also of the biblical patriarch Jacob. The religious authorities of the Jewish community excommunicated Frank and his followers due to his heretical doctrines that included deification of himself as part of a three-thing and other controversial concepts such as neo-procreation, purification through transgression. Frank's teachings led his sect into scandalous practices, including ritualized orgies incestuous acts, most notably between fathers and daughters, and the deliberate violation of Jewish moral laws, which he preached were necessary to hasten a messianic redemption through embracing the abyss of faith. So he was born in Kolokwa, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Jacob Leibowitz, 1726. I think he looks like one of those dinosaurs with like the head in, in Jurassic Park. It's like got a really strong fucking nose. Died December 10th, 1971, age 64 to 65. Offenbach am Main, Principality of Eisenberg, Berstein, Holy Roman Empire, which is neither holy nor a Roman nor an empire. His children Eve Frank, religious life, Judaism, organization, Frankism. Frank arguably created a religious movement now referred to as Frankism, which incorporated aspects of other shit and Judaism. Followers known as Frankists and engaged in sexually promiscuous rites, such as the infamous 1756 incident in Langstrown, where they were allegedly caught dancing around a half-naked woman, symbolizing the Shekinah. Later, Frankists were encouraged to convert in mass to other bullshit. The development of Frankism was one of the consequences of the Messianic movement of Shabbatai Zvi. The religious mysticism followed socio-economic changes among the Jews of Poland, Lithuania, and Ruthenia. Historical background. Dog, how much book? I hate reading. I hate reading this shit. It's hard on my eyes. It sucks. It sucks. All right. Uh, Historical background. There were numerous outbreaks of followers of Shabbatai Zvi in eastern Poland, now Ukraine, particularly in Podolia and Galicia, between the late 17th and early 18th century. In expectation, the Great Messianic Revolution, the members of these societies violated Jewish laws and customs. The mystical cult of the Sabbateans is believed to have included both asceticism and sensuality. Some did penance for their sins, subjected themselves to self-inflicted pain, and mourned for Zion. Others disregarded the strict rules of modesty required by times were accused of being licentious or even committing ritual incest. The Polish rabbis attempted to place the Sabbatean heresy in Harem in the assembly of Lwów, now Lviv, in Ukraine, in 1722. Still, they could not fully succeed, as it was widely popular among the nascent Jewish middle class. Early life. Jacob Frank is believed to have been born as Jacob Leibowitz Yankov Leibovich to a Jewish family in Korolówka in Podolia of eastern Poland, now Ukraine. In about 1726, the Polish historian Gaudenty Pikulski affirmed that Frank was born in Bukak, and Agnon even showed the house where he was born and located on Korolówka Street in Bukak. His father was a Sabbatean and moved to Czernowitz in the Carpathian region of Bukovina, Bukov, Bukovina in 1730, where the Sabbatean influence at the time was strong. As a traveling merchant in textile and precious stones, Jacob Frank often visited Ottoman territories, and where he earned the nickname Frank, a name generally given in the East to Europeans, and lived in the centers of contemporary Sabbateanism, Salonika and Smyrna. In the early 1750s, Frank became intimate with the leaders of Sabbateans. Two followers of the Sabbatean leader, Osman Baba, born 1720, were witnessed at the wedding in 1752. In 1755, he appeared in Podolia, gathered a group of local adherents, and began to preach the revelations which were communicated to him by the Donma in Salonika. One of the gatherings in Corona ground ended in a scandal, and the rabbi's attention was drawn to the new teachings. Frank was forced to leave Podolia while his followers were hounded and denounced to the local authorities by the rabbis in 1756. At the rabbinical court held in the village of Seitanau, now Saturniv in Ukraine, the Sabbateans were accused of having broken fundamental Jewish laws of morality and modesty. Declaration of being a successor of Shabbatai Zvi. At the critical moment, Jacob Frank came to Irwania, proclaimed himself to be a direct successor to Shabbatai Zvi and Atman Baba, and assured his adherents that he had received revelations from heaven. These revelations called for the conversion of Frank and his followers to something else, which was to be a visible transition stage to the future Das or religion to be revealed by Frank. In 1759, negotiations looked toward the conversion of the Frankists to other stuff were being actively carried on with the higher representatives of the Polish people thing. At the same time, the Frankists tried to secure another discussion with the rabbis. The Polish primate Lubensky and the papal nuncio Nicholas Serra were suspicious of the aspirations of the Frankists, but at the insistence of the administrator of bishopric of Lwów, the canon Mokolski, the discussion was arranged. It was held in Lwów and presided over by Mokolski. Other missionaries, like missionaries, also tried to detour the Frankists to Protestantism, and a handful did join the Moravian baptism of the Frankists. I want to get into science. All right, this isn't that bad. Okay, baptism of the Frankists. At the discussion in 1759, the rabbis energetically repulsed their opponents. After the discussion of the Frankists were requested to demonstrate in practice their adherence to other shit. Jacob Frank, who had then arrived in Lwów, encouraged the followers to take the decisive step. The baptism of the Frankists was celebrated with great solemnity in the churches of Lwów, with members of the Polish Szlachta nobility acting as godparents. The neophytes adopted the names of their godfathers and godmothers and ultimately joined their ranks. Frank himself was baptized in Lwów, 17 September 1759, and again in Warsaw the next day. The king, Augustus III, as his godfather. Frank's baptismal name was Joseph. In the course of 1 year, more than 500 individuals were converted to other shit at Lwów, and nearly 1,000 in the following year. By 1790, 26,000 Jews were recorded baptized in Poland. However, the Frankists continued to be viewed with suspicion due to their strange doctrines. Frank was arrested in Warsaw on 6th of February 1760 and delivered to a tribunal on the charge of heresy. He was convicted of teaching heresy and imprisoned in the monastery of Czechoslovakia. Prison in later days. There's a Joshua Monastery in Czechoslovakia, Eisenberg Castle, Elfenbach on Main, Germany, while Frank spent his last 4 years of his life. Jacob Frank on his deathbed in 1790s. Here are your pictures, kids. All right. Frank's imprisonment lasted 13 years, yet it only increased his influence with the sect of surrounding him with the aura of martyrdom. Many Frankists established themselves as Czechoslovakia and kept up constant communication with their holy master. Frank inspired his followers through mystical speeches and epistles, in which he stated that salvation could be gained only by first adopting the religion of Edom, and later adopting a future religion which Frank called Das, Dot, or knowledge in Hebrew. After the first partition of Poland, Frank was released by the Russian general Bibikov, who had occupied Czechoslovakia in August 1772. Frank lived in the Moravian town of Brno until 1786, surrounded by a retinue of adherents and pilgrims from Poland. His daughter Eve began an important role in the sect at the time. Frank kept a force of armed men by his court. The future Tsar Paul I of Russia visited him with Joseph II of Austria. Accompanied by his daughter, Frank repeatedly traveled to Vienna, succeeded in gaining the favor of the court. Maria Theresa regarded him as a disseminator of other shit among the Jews, and it is even said that Joseph II was favorably inclined to the young Eve Frank. Ultimately, Frank was deemed unmanageable and he was obliged to leave Austria. He moved with his daughter and his retinue to Offenbach in Germany, where he assumed the title of Baron of Offenbach and lived as a wealthy nobleman in Eisenberg Castle, receiving financial support from his Polish and Moravian rulers who made frequent pilgrimages to Offenbach. On the death of Frank in 1790, he became the holy mistress and leader of the sect. Her fortunes dwindled in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, and she died in Offenbach in 1816. Some Frankists were active during the French Revolution, such as Moses de Brusca, a son of Frank's Sabbatean cousin in Offenbach, Schendel de Brusca. Many of the many of the Frankists saw Napoleon Bonaparte as a potential messiah. The Frankists scattered in Poland and Bohemia eventually intermarried into the gentry. Szymanowska, a piano virtuoso, came from a Frankish family. Wanda Grabowska, the mother of Tadeusz Boy Zelensky, also descended from Frankists. In 1883, a Russian magazine, Russian Old Times, issued memoirs of an influential official of the Russian Ministry of the Interior, the Privy Councilor and staunch bad guy, staunch person, O.A. Fetlslavsky. He promulgated the allegations that the mothers of the three greatest men of Poland, Frederick Chopin, Adam Mickiewicz, and Julius Slovak, were converted Jews from the Frankist sect. Similar assertions were put forth by Mises and Baldwin. Notable Sabbatean teachers of Jacob Frank: Rabbi Issachar, one of Frank's principal teachers, a disciple of Chaim Malach. Frank studied with him in Izmir in 1750 to 1752. Rabbi Mordechai ben Elias Margalit of Prague, Mardo Chuez in Polish, another of Frank's principal teachers. He helped introduce Frank to the practices of the Karakashi sect of the Donma in the Turkish Empire, which worshipped Baruchaya Russo, also known as Atman Baba. Frank traveled with him to Salonika in November 1753. He left Bohemia and moved to the Empire after Joseph Meyer Kamenker was caught smuggling Sabbatean literature into Germany in 1725. Mordecai allegedly Mordecai allegedly Mordecai allegedly engaged in adultery and other antinomian conduct. Leib, Jewish Sabbatean teacher of Frank's during the latter childhood, Leib, a Jewish Sabbatean teacher of Frank's during the latter's childhood in Wallachia and Moldavia. He was also a wonder worker who attempted to dispel demons. Jacob Frank's writings, the collection of the words of Hashem, available online in English, translated, edited, and annotated by Harris Leanowitz with an introduction by Leanowitz. Cultural references: Jacob Frank is the subject of Andros Jolowski book Mol- Mollywood, 1994. The personality of Frank has been inspired. The personality of Frank has inspired the Polish historical movie Das in 2011, directed by Adrian Panik. Frank is played by Olgierd Lukasiewicz. Jacob Frank is a central character in the novel to push novel by Polish novel writer Olga Tokarczuk. The Books of Jacob, Polish Księgi Jacobowi, published in October 2014 by Wydawnictwo Literackie. Um. Okay. So let's Okay, so let's learn about the Sabbateans first. Hold on. Unless I have to read all that other bullshit. Dude, we just read through all this shit. You know who they are? We'll read it. This sucks. Sucks. Have you ever known any Sabbateans? Um, Iron Claw or Frankus, more like it. And it was very strange to me. We'll talk about it. I had this dream yesterday. They're betting it's gonna get him horny as fuck, but I know it's Revitson, who I don't like, and for some reason this dream she was wearing lowrider jeans, and she made out with me, and I'm. It was not like a good dream. I was not. I did not like it. It's bothersome to me. But if you ever study my dreams last night, that's what happened. And it could have been like any other Rebbitzin in the world, and I would have been probably like pretty cool with it. So yeah, Rebbitzin back. So you dream of making out with Rebbitzins, and we're like, yeah, and 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 you dream of like criticizing people who are who are disrespectful of Holocaust and Shabbat and stuff. I'm like, yeah. She'd be like, tight. I'd be like, I don't like it. But nobody's perfect. But like some of these people have the means to dis not uh, they have the means to be able to live within walking distance of the shul, and they don't. And I don't know why. Anyway, the Sabbateans are a variety of Jewish followers, disciples, and believers in Shabbatai Zvi, 1626 to 1676, an Ottoman Jewish rabbi and Kabbalist who was proclaimed to be the Jewish Messiah in 1666 by Nathan of Gaza. Illustration of Shabbatai Zvi, 1906, Jude's Historic Museum. There you go. Vast numbers of Jews in the Jewish diaspora accepted his claims even after he outwardly became an apostate due to his forced conversion to Islam in the same year. Shabbatai Zvi's followers, both during his proclaimed messiahship and after his forced conversion to Islam, are known as Sabbateans. In the late 17th century, northern Italy experienced a surge of Sabbatean activity driven by the missionary efforts of Abraham Miguel Cardoso. Around 1700, a radical faction within the Dhamma movement, led by Baruch Russo, emerged which sought to abolish many biblical prohibitions. During the same period, Sabbatean groups from Poland migrated to the land of Israel. The Sabbatean movement continued to disseminate through Central Europe and northern Italy during the 18th century, propelled by prophets and believers. Concurrently, anti-Sabbatean literature emerged, leading to a notable dispute between Jacob Emden Yavitz, Joseph I. Beschutz. Additionally, a successor movement known as Frankism by Jacob Frank began in Eastern Europe during this century. Part of the Sabbateans lived on until well into the 21st century Turkey as descendants of Dhamma. Shabbatai Zvi was a Sephardic ordained rabbi from Smyrna, now Izmir, Turkey, a Kabbalist and Romaniote origin. That's Greek-speaking ethnic Jewish community. Zvi was active throughout the Ottoman Empire, claimed to be the long-awaited Jewish Messiah. He was a founder of the Sabbatean movement, whose followers subsequently were known as Dhamma converts or crypto Jews. Conversion to Islam in February 1666. Upon arriving in Constantinople, Sabbatai was imprisoned by the order of the Grand Vizier Kopruwade Fazil Ahmed Pasha. In September of that same year, after being moved from different prisons around the capital to Adrianople, 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 the imperial court's seat, the judgment on accusations of fomenting sedition. Shabbatai was given by the Grand Vizier in the name of the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Mehmed IV, the choice of either facing death by some type of ordeal or by converting to Islam. Sabbatai seems to have chosen the latter by donning from then on a turban. He was then also rewarded by the heads of the Ottoman state and generous with a generous pension for his compliance with the political and religious with, with a generous pension for his compliance with their political and religious plans. Shabbatai's conversion to Islam was extremely disheartening for the world's Jewish communities. In addition to the misery and disappointment from within, Muslims and Christians and other people jeered at the scorned and credulous and duped Jews. In spite of Shabbatai's apostasy, many of his adherents still tenaciously clung to him, claiming that his conversion was part of the messianic scheme. The belief was further upheld and strengthened by the likes of Nathan of Gaza and Samuel Primo, who were interested in maintaining the movement. Many within Zvi's inner circle followed him into Islam, including his wife Sarah and most of his closest relatives and friends. Nathan of Gaza, the scholar closest to Zvi, who had caused Zvi to reveal his messiahship, and in turn became his prophet, never followed his master into Islam, but remained a Jew, albeit excommunicated by his Jewish brethren. After Shabbatai Zvi's apostasy, many Jews, although horrified, clung to the belief that Zvi could be regarded as the true Jewish Messiah. They constituted the largest number of Sabbateans during the 17th and 18th centuries. By the 19th century, Jewish Sabbateans had been reduced to small groups of hidden followers who feared being discovered for their beliefs that were deemed to be entirely heretical and antithetical to rabbinic Judaism. These Jews fell under Sabbateans, which originated when many Sabbateans refused to accept that Zvi's feigned apostasy might have been indicative of the fact their faith was genuinely an illusion. Another large group of Sabbateans, after Zvi's apostasy, began to view Islam in an extremely negative light. Polemics against Islam erupted directly after Zvi's forced conversion. Some of these attacks were considered part of a largely anti-Sabbatean agenda. Accusations coming from anti-Sabbatean Jews revolved around the idea of Sabbatai Zvi's feigned conversion to Islam, and Islam was rightfully an indicator of a false claim of messiah, messianship. Messianship. Inside the Ottoman Empire, those followers of Zvi who had converted to Islam but who secretly continued Jewish observances and Brit Milah became known as Donma, Turkish Donma convert. There were some internal subdivisions within the sect according to the geographical locations of the group and according to who the leaders of these groups were after the death of Shabtai Zvi. Sabbatean related controversies in Jewish history. Shabtai Zvi enthroned as the Jewish Messiah from Tikkun, Amsterdam, 1666. The Emden Eibeshütz controversy. The Emden Eibeshütz controversy was a serious rabbinical disputation with wider political ramifications in Europe that followed the accusation by Rabbi Jacob Emden, 1697 to 1776, of the Common Era, a fierce opponent of the Sabbateans, against Rabbi Jonathan Eibeshütz, 1690 to 1764, of the Common Era, whom he accused of being a secret Sabbatean. The Emden Eibeshütz controversy arose concerning the amulets which Emden suspected Eibeshütz of issuing. It was alleged that these amulets recognized the messianic claims of Shabbatai Zvi. Emden then accused Eibeshütz of heresy. Emden was known for his attacks directed against the adherents or those he supposed to be the adherents of Shabbatai Zvi. In Emden's eyes, Eberschultz was a convicted Sabbatean. The controversy lasted several years, continuing even after Eberschultz's death. Emden asserted Emden's assertion of heresy was chiefly based on the interpretation of some amulets prepared by Eberschultz, in which Emden professed to the Sabbatean allusions. Hostilities began before Eberschutz left Prague, when Eibs was named chief rabbi of the three communities of Altona, Hamburg, and Wandsbek. In 1751, the controversy reached the stage of intense and bitter antagonism. Emden maintained that he was at first pretended by the threats from publishing anything against Eberschutz. He solemnly declared in his synagogue that the writer of the amulets to be Sabbatean heretic and deserving of harem excommunication. The majority of the rabbis in Poland, Moravia, and Bohemia, as well as the leaders of the three communities, supported Eberschutz. The accusation was utterly incredible. In July 1725, the Ashkenazic Beit Din of Amsterdam had issued a ban on excommunication of the entire Sabbatean sect, Kat ha-Ma'aminim, Ma'am-in writings of Sabbatean. If you don't know what kids sounded out, it's the same for adults as it is for children. Writings of Sabbatean nature found at the Beit Din at the time were attributed to Eberschutz. In early September, similar proclamations were issued by the Bete Din of Frankfurt and the triple community of Altona, Hamburg, and Wandsbek. The three bans were printed and circulated in other Jewish communities throughout Europe. Rabbi Ezekiel Katzenellenbogen, the chief rabbi of the triple community, and Rabbi Moses Hagiz, were unwilling Eberschutz publicly, mentioning that greater than him have fallen and crumbled, and that there is nothing we can do to him. However, Rabbi Katzenellenbogen stated that one of the texts found by the Amsterdam Beit Din, Va'avo Hayom El Ha'ayin, and I came the day into the fountain, were authored by Joseph Eibelschutz, and declared that all copies of the work were in all circulation should be immediately burned. Emden later suggested that the rabbis decided against attacking Eibelschutz out of a reluctance to offend his powerful family and a fear of rich supporters of his living in their communities. As a result of Eberschutz and other rabbis in Prague formulating a new and different ban against Sabbateanism in September of that year, his reputation was restored, and Eberschutz was regarded as having been totally vindicated. The issue was to arise again, albeit tangentially, in the 1751 dispute between Emden and Eibschutz. The controversy was a momentous incident in Jewish history of that period, including involving both Yechezkel Landau and the Vilna Gaon, and made having crushed the lingering belief in Sabbatai current even in some Orthodox circles. In 1760, the quarrel broke out once more when some Sabbatean elements were discovered among the students of Eibschutz's yeshiva. At the same time, I have an itch. At the same time, with his younger son, Wolf presented himself as a Sabbatean prophet, with the result that the yeshiva was closed. Sabbateans and early Hasidism. Some scholars see seeds of the Hasidic movement within the Sabbatean movement. When Hasidism began to spread its influence, a serious schism evolved between the Hasidic and non-Hasidic Jews. Those who rejected the Hasidic movement dubbed themselves Mizgagdim, opponents of Hasidic Judaism, expressed concern that Hasidism might become a messianic sect, as had occurred among the followers of both Shabbatai Zvi and Jacob Frank. However, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, came at the time when the Jewish masses of Eastern Europe were reeling in bewilderment and disappointment engendered by the two Jewish false messiahs, Shabbatai Zvi 1626 to 1676, and Jacob Frank 1726 to 1791 in particular. Sabbateans and modern secularism. Some scholars have claimed that the Sabbatean movement in general fostered and connected well with the principles of modern secularism. Rabbis who opposed Sabbateans: Joseph Escapa, 1572 to 1662, was especially known for having been a teacher of Zvi and having afterward excommunicated him. Aaron Lapapa, 1590 to 1674, was the rabbi at Smyrna in 1665 when Zvi's movement was at its height there. He was one of the few rabbis to oppose and excommunicate Zvi. Zvi and his adherents retorted by deposing him, forcing him to leave the city, and his office was given to his colleague, Hayim ben Veneste. At the time, one of Sabbatai's followers. After Sabbatai's conversion to Islam, the Papa seems to have been reinstated. Jacob ben Aaron Sasporta, 1610 to 1698, was one of the fiercest opponents of the Sabbatean movement. He wrote many letters to various communities in Europe, Asia, and Africa, exhorting them to unmask the impostors and to warn the people against them. He documented his struggle in his book Zitzat Novel Zvi, the title being based on Isaiah 28:4. He wrote a number of works such as Toledat Yaakov in 1652 of the Common Era, an index of biblical passages found in the Haggadah of the Jerusalem Talmud, similar to Aaron Pasaro's Toledat Aharon, which relates to the Babylonian Talmud only, and Ohel Yaakov 1737, a volume of halakhic responsa, which includes polemical correspondence against Zvi and his followers. Jacob Haggis, 1620 to 1674, was one of Zvi's chief opponents. 1620 to 1674 Common Era, was one of Zvi's chief opponents, who put him under the ban. About 1673, Haggis went to Constantinople to publish his Lahem HaPanim, but he died there before his book was accomplished. This book, as well as many others of his, was lost. Naphtali Cohen, 1649 to 1718 Common Era. If I don't ever, I usually mean Common Era, I'll say a Hebrew. You know, it's like, you know. And if you don't, uh, we'll teach it to you later. Was a Kabbalist who was tricked into giving an approbation to a book of Sabbatean Nehemiah Hayun. Provided with this and with other recommendations secured in the same way, Hayun traveled throughout Moravia and Silesia, propagating everywhere his Sabbatean teachings. Cohen soon discovered his mistake and endeavored without success to recover his approbation, although he did not yet realize the full import of the book. It was in 1713, while Cohen was staying at Breslau, where he acted as a rabbi until 1716, and Hans V. of Amsterdam informed him its tenets. Cohen thereupon acted rigorously. He launched a ban against the author of his book and became one of the most zealous supporters of Haham Zvi in his campaign against Hayum. David Nito, 1654 to 1728, was the Haham of Spanish and Portuguese Jewish community in London. Was the Haham of the Spanish and Portuguese Jewish community in London. He waged war untiringly on the Sabbateans, which he regarded as dangerous to the best interests of Judaism, and in his connection wrote his Esh. London 1715 against Nehemiah Hayun, who supported Zvi Ashkenazi 1656-1618, known as the Chacham Zvi, for some time rabbi of Amsterdam, was a resolute opponent of the followers of Shabbatai Zvi in Salonika. He also witnessed the impact of Shabbatai Zvi movement of the Shabbatai Zvi movement on the community, and this experience became a determining factor in his whole career. His son Jacob Emden served as rabbi in Emden and followed in his father's footsteps in combating the Sabbatean movement. Moses Haggis, 1671 to 1750, around 1750, Common Era, was born in Yerushalayim and waged a campaign against Sabbatean emissaries during 1725 to 1726. Jacob Emden, 1697 to 1776, Common Era, was a Talmudic scholar and leading opponent of the Sabbateans. He is best known as the opponent of Rabbi Jonathan Eibscholtz, whom he accused of being a Sabbatean during the Emden-Eibscholtz controversy. All right, what are you doing? Um, all right, we gotta read this fucking thing on Frankism. Frankism is a Sabbatean religious movement originating in Rabbinic Judaism of the 18th and 19th centuries. Created in Podolia, it was named after its founder, Jacob Frank. Frank completely rejected Jewish norms, preaching to his followers that they were obligated to transgress moral boundaries, embracing antinomianism. The Franks engaged in incest orgies and sex rituals, such as the infamous 1756 incident in La Chronne, where they were allegedly caught dancing around a half-naked woman, symbolizing the Shekinah. At its height, Frankism claimed perhaps 50,000 followers, primarily Jews living in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, as well as in other regions in Central and Eastern Europe. Later, Frankists were encouraged to convert en masse to other sects. All right. Description: Frankists believed in Shabtai Zvi, one of the most famous of all self-proclaimed Mashiachs in Jewish history. He believed in transgressing Jewish commandments to elevate the divine sparks constrained by them. He performed actions and that violated traditional Jewish prohibitions, such as eating foods forbidden by kashrut, the Jewish dietary laws, and celebrating prescribed fast days as feast days. He eventually opted to convert to Islam rather than face execution for claiming to be the Messiah in Judaism. After Zvi's death, several branches of Shabbatism evolved that disagreed over which aspects of Judaism would be preserved and discarded. Jacob Frank claimed to be the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zvi and followed and extended his practice of transgression. Father and daughter incest was commonly practiced by his followers. Orgies featured prominently in ritual. Frank claimed that all laws and teachings will fall, and following antinomianism asserted that the most important obligation is the transgression of every boundary. Organization: Jacob Frank stood at the head of Frankism. He regarded his followers as soldiers, and all were members of a company to build an army to secure Frank's rule over a Frankish country. There were four company locations in Ivain, Czechoslovakia, Brno, and Offbach am Main. In Ivani, Czechoslovakia, Brno, and Offenbach am Main. Members were required to wear plate armor shields and helmets and train hard. His teachings were not intended for the ears of all Frankists, but only for his personally selected small circle of so-called brothers and sisters, of whom he demanded blind obedience. Frank tried to maintain absolute control over at least this circle, taking advantage of the tendency to believe in shadim and magic. Shadim are spirits or demons in the Tanakh and Jewish mythology. Shadim not, however, correspond exactly to the modern conceptions of demons as evil entities, which originated other places. While evil spirits were thought to cause melodies, maladies, Shadim differed conceptually from evil spirits. Shadim were not considered evil demigods, but the gods of foreigners. Further, they were envisaged as evil only in the sense that they were not from Hashem. So, like the shade Ashmodai in bird-like form, the typical rooster feet is depicted in the Compendium Resimum Todius Artis Measure. There's that. Child sacrifice in the shade Moloch, showing the typical description of the Ammonite deity Moloch of old and back in the day in medieval and modern sources. Oh fuck, dude! I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not. I'm not. I'm sorry. You look at the pictures through my glasses or something. I need this fucking device, so I can't. All right. So, doctrine. Words of Bob has the most important Frankish text. Siga Slow Panchich, the book of the words of the Lab, is written in Polish and elementary, almost folk language, and consists of short sayings, some fewer than 10 words, interpretations and parables, visions and dreams, long speculations about the elements of the doctrine, various episodes from Frank's life, the Frankish company, the contemporary rulers, and fairy tale stories up to 1,100 words long. To support them, there are many quotations from the Torah and Zohar, as well as popular stories from the surrounding culture, which were quoted verbatim and paraphrased or adapted to his own doctrine. The text begins and ends with a vision. Section 1 is Frank's vision of his calling. Section 2192 is Frank's final testament to the company. The words of the law begin to Jewish literature, but its contents reject Jewish tradition and teachings. Biblical figures such as Jacob, Esau, and Esther are the foundations of Frank's teaching. Frank's brothers compiled the work between 1755 and 1791 as Zibur collection of materials developed in numerous meetings. The original Polish title, Księga book, is therefore somewhat misleading and is only used once in the collection. In 2192, it is written down starting around 1773 and distributed exclusively in the handwritten form of his widely scattered followers. The last known complete manuscript, Words of Law, were destroyed along with numerous other Frankist sources during the destruction of Warsaw in World War II. Until recently, all researchers of Frankism have relied on the source material of extensive biography of Alexander Kraussar, the most important study of Frankism from the pre-war period. Dog, I'm sick of reading today. Okay, the V doctrine in Frankism. Frank is the third messianic incarnation of Tiferet Shabtai Zvi and Baruchia Russo, 1677 to 1720, Common Era, and also the reborn forefather Jacob. Nonetheless, he is only a helper. The actual guide in Frankism is the Virgin the incarnation of the Shekinah and the female Messiah. Frankists are supposed to follow her bravely like soldiers through all horrors. The path by which Frank sought to lead the followers to life was symbolized by the letter V, which also represents Jacob's ladder. The seeker must first climb into the abyss to reach the deepest level of humiliation and then up to the life, climb back up to life. According to Frankist doctrine, the patriarchy and Moshe had already tried to follow the path but has heads V. Frank proclaims that the Frankist ascent down the V ladder into the deepest humiliation is reflected in society's hatred and exclusion of them, which result from Frankism's consistent implementation of the idea that all laws and teachings of the world are only laws in the three evil world rulers, the Pope, the Tsar, and the Sultan, and therefore do not need to be observed. In the best case, such laws and teachings need only to be kept in pretense. Religions and teachings of the world can be worn like an empty shell and then discarded at whim because the true Torah is yet to be revealed. The Mosaic Law with the Ten Commandments should be despised as it is part of the Old Torah. The contempt of all teaching of the world culminates in a statement circle of to by Frank to his close circle of brothers and sisters that amounts to a command for total assimilation. One should adapt the new respective religion or language depending on the country. Frank also advises mass assimilation in the following passage. Shlomo was wise, wiser than all the peoples. He mixed with all the nations, took the daughters of kings as his wives, and did not get anything out of it. He could mix with the nations because he was a king. But here the whole world knows that I am descendant from Jews, that I am newly baptized and poor, but I have hope that I will mix with their society this winter, and they themselves will call me. I can tell you, whoever does not mix with the nations, all his work is in vain. Frank was not interested in the acculturation of Jews. Rather, he wanted them to integrate into society in order to ultimately overthrow it. If the enemies of the Jews in the 18th century had been familiar with Frank's secret sectarian canon, it would have made the already hotly contested Jewish emancipation considerably more difficult. This shows a picture of the Frankist Virgin, Eve Frank, 1774, Common Era. The center of Frankism was a new concept of the Shekinah. However, the term was forbidden in Frankism because Jacob Frank referred to her as the Virgin. Thus, Shekinah in Kabbalistic form, Klaus Samuel Davidovitz, a Jewish studies scholar of the University of Vienna, who has written extensively on Frank and Frankism, assumes it was initially an old name for God that referred to the indwelling of the presence of God for a specific place. According to Frank's teachings, all of the important forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses, strove to a virgin who manifested herself in different persons, such as Rachel, and all failed. Moses' liberation from Egypt could not have been complete either, since the foundation of salvation is the Virgin. But now, according to Frank, the real Virgin had arrived, a female Messiah, visible to all people, his daughter Eve Frank. In a teaching, Frank identifies himself with the traditional Messiah ben Joseph, who will have significant impact but perish in the fight against the enemies of the end times. Just as he precedes the Messiah ben David, Frank prepares the way for the Virgin, his daughter. Frankism characterizes the Virgin using elements of the Esther stories and is strongly influenced by the veneration of that bitch surrounding the black lady, not black lady, but black, I don't know, like a prayer of Czechoslovakia. No one knows how to say that. He claimed that the black, like a prayer, would lead his followers to the Frankist virgin, and therefore presented baptism as a necessary step. Following the Bahar and the Zohar, in which the Shekinah are described as being like a princess tower. Here, the Sefer HaBahar, Book of Clarity, Book of Illumination, is an anonymous mystical work attributed to the first century rabbinic sage Nahunya ben Akana, a temporary of Yochanan ben Zakkai, because it starts with the word. It begins with the words Rabbi Nehuya ben Hakuna said. It is it is also known as the Midrash of Rabbi Nehuya ben Hakuna. First mentioned in the 12th century Languedoc Provençal works. The Bahar is an early work of esoteric Jewish mystical tradition and eventually became known as Kabbalah. The work is considered by scholars to be pseudepigraphical, composed in Provence in the late 12th century. We'll read this one. Hold on. Maybe. Fuck. Dude, this is a lot of work. Whatever. This. Okay, title. Maimonides in the commentary on the Torah, Genesis 1, is one of the first to quote the work under the title Midrash Rabbi Nenuya ben Hakana. Rabbi Nenuya ben Hakana said the opening sentence. Among medieval Kabbalists, it became known as Sefer Abahir, taken from the opening comment. One verse says, "And now men see not the light which is bright Bahir in the skies." Job 37:21. Authorship. Kabbalists ascribe authorship to the Bahir of Rabbi Nehunya, a rabbi of the Mishnaic era who lived around 100 of the Common Era. Medieval Kabbalists write that the Bahir did not come down to them as a unified book, but rather in pieces found in scattered scrolls and booklets. The scattered fragmentary nature of the Bahir's text, which sometimes ends discussion in mid-sentence jumps randomly from topic, supports this claim. The historical critical study of the book points to a later date of composition. For some time, the scholars believed that it was written in the 13th century by Isaac the Blind or by those in his school. The first sentence, "And now men see not the light which is bright in the skies," Job 37:21, begin isolated and having no connection with what follows, was taken to be an illusion of the blindness of its author. However, the modern scholars of Kabbalah now hold that at least part of the Bahir was an adaptation of an older work, and the Sefer Rabbah. The older work is mentioned in some of the works of the Geonim. However, no complete copies of the Sefer Rabbah are in existence. However, quotes from this book can still be found in some older works. Scholar Ronit Moroz argues that the elements of the Bahir date back to 10th century Babylonia, as witnessed by the acceptance of the Babylonian system of vowel points, which later fell into disuse, while the other elements were written in the 12th century province. Many scholars of Kabbalah hold that the Bahir adds Gnostic elements to the older work. The question of how much Gnosticism has influenced Kabbalah is one of the major themes of the modern day research on Kabbalah and the works of Gershom Scholem and Moshe Idol for more information. There's a striking affinity between the symbolism of a Sefer HaBahir on the one hand and the speculations of the Gnostics and the theory of the ions of the other. The fundamental problem in the study of the book is the affinity based on an as yet unknown historical link between the Gnosticism and the Mishnaic and Talmudic era and the sources from which the material in Sefer HaBahir is derived? Or should it possibly be seen as purely psychological phenomena, i.e., a spontaneous upsurge from the depths of the soul imagination without any historical continuity? Bahar Encyclopedia Judaica Keter Publishing History. Kabbalists believe that the oral tradition of the Bahar goes back to the 1st century CE. Common Era. It is possible that some secret manuscript existed before publication in the 12th century. Around 1174 Common Era, the Bahar was published by Province School for Kabbalists and was circulated to a limited audience in manuscript form. 1298. The earliest extant manuscript dates from the end of the 13th century. 1331. Earliest commentary on the Bahar is written by Rabbi Meir ben Shalom Abu Shula, a disciple of Shlomo ben Ardaret Rashba. and it is published anonymously under the title Or Haganuz. End of the 15th century, the Bahar is translated into Latin by Flavius Mithridates, but the translation is wordy and not useful. 1651, the Bahar is published in Amsterdam together with Mayan HaChachma is in printed form. 1706, the Bahar is published in Berlin together with Mayan HaChachma. 1784, the Bahar is published in Sklav and Koretz. 1800, the Bahar is published in Lvov. 1830, the Bahar is published in Lvov. 1849, the Bahar is published in an unknown place as part of the Chamshi Kabbalah. 1865, the Bahar is published in Lvov. 1883, the Bahar is published in Vilna. 1913, the Bahar is published in Vilna. 1923, the German translation is published by Gershom Scholem. 1951, the Bahar is published in Jerusalem. 1979, English translation by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan is published. 1980, Latin translation Guillaume Postels is published by Francois Secret. 1994, Hebrew text is published from the manuscripts by Daniel Abrams. 2005, Latin translation Flavius Mithridates published together with a critical edition of Hebrew text by Saverio Campanini. The 13th century Kabbalist Rabbi Isaac Cohen reports that the Sefer HaBahir came from the land of Israel in the early Pietists, the sages of Ashkenaz, the Kabbalists of Germany, and from there to the early wise men of in province who chase after all sorts of written records of wisdom, those who know the divine supernal knowledge, but they saw only part of the book and not all of it because they did not see it in its entirety in its complete form. Several distinct literary layers can be distinguished in Bahar, some written in the East at the end of the 19th century or in the early 10th century, and some in the 12th century province. The book Bahar uses the Babylonian grammar and vocalization system. Uh, The Babylonian vocalization, as opposed to the Tiberian one used in Hebrew to this day, is mainly upper, that is, marked above the letters, and is characterized, among other properties, by the sigil being pronounced like a pada. Only if Behar was written in a region in which the Babylonian system was in use can the claim Hashem placed the pada above a letter and the sigil beneath be meaningful. The pada is upper according to the Babylonian vocalization system, whereas the Segal is lower according to the Tiberian system. Only according to the Babylonian system is it possible to pronounce the combination of vowels at the same time, and both have the same pronunciation, the short U. The use of the Babylonian vocalization system to symbolize the holy is evidenced by the passage's date of composition. At the beginning of the 10th century, a debate arose between Jewish communities over which grammatical system most faithfully represented the Torah. In other words, how was it pronounced when it was given to Moshe at Sinai? The debate ended with the victory of the Tiberian system and with the understanding that the Babylonian system reflected a foreign influence on the Hebrew language. Thereafter, one could no longer employ it as a proper symbolic instrument for the holy. Hence, the Babylonian layer must be written before the debate was concluded. Contents: The Beher assumes the form of exegenic midrash in the first chapters of Genesis. It is divided into 60 short paragraphs or 140 passages and is the form of dialogue between master and disciples. The main characters are Ra Amora or Amorai and Ra Rahamai, the Rahum or Rahumai. Some statements in the book are attributed to Rabbi Berechiah and Rabbi Yonahan, Rabbi Boone, rabbis mentioned in the later Midrashic literature. The Beher contains commentaries explaining the mystical significance of biblical verses, the mystical significance of the shapes of the Hebrew letters, and the mystical significance of cantillation signs and vowel points on the letters in them. The mystical significance of statements in the Sefer Yeritza, Book of Creation, and use of sacred names in magic. Okay, there are 200 aphorism like paragraphs. Each paragraph uses references from the Torah to expand upon its presentation. As with all Kabbalistic texts, the meanings are highly symbolic and subject to numerous opportunities for interpretation. A common analogy is used throughout. A king, his servants, his daughter, and his gardens are all used to explain a meaning first of Torah and then in general of the main topic of the text. The paragraphs refer to each with other in segments and are broken into 5 sections in the R.D.A. Kaplan translation. These sections are loosely grouped together, but they do more or less stay within the underlying themes given by their title. Section 1, the 1 through 16, consists of commentary on the first verse of Genesis or of the creation story. Section 2, verses 17 through 44, talks about the alphabet or the Hebrew alphabet and gets its inspiration from the Sefer Yetzirah, which links all these letters of creation to the overall mysticism presented in the Torah. Section 3, verses 45 through 122, concerns the 7 voices of the Sephirot. Section 4, verses 124 to 193, is grouped under the section title of 10 Sephirot. Section 5, verses 1793 through 200. If I said version, I meant verses. Completes the discourse on the mysteries of the soul. Sphirot. The Hebrew word sphirot was first described in Sefer Yetzirah as corresponding to the 10 basic numbers and did not possess the meaning that later Kabbalists gave to it. It is in the Bahir that we find the first discussion of the Kabbalistic concept of Sphirot and divine attributes and powers emanating from God. Why are they called Sphirot? Because it is written, the heavens tell God's glory. Creation of the universe. The world, according to the Bahir, is not the product of the act of creation. Like God, this book existed from all eternity, not only in potentiality but in actuality, and the creation consisted merely in the appearance of that which in the first Sphira, or Haganuz, or as it is called, Keter Elyon, which emanated from God. The Sphira gave birth to Chokmah, wisdom, which emanated Bina, intelligence. From these three, which are the superior Sphirot, and from the primary principles of the universe, emanated from one another the 7 inferior Sphirot, from which all material beings are formed. All the 10 Sphirot are linked one to the other, and every one of them has an active and a passive quality, emanating and receiving. The efflux of one sphera from another is symbolized in the form of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Thus, the letter Gimel, shaped like a tube open at each end, represents a sphera which receives strength at one end and discharges from the other. The 10 sphera are the energy of God, the forms in which his being manifests itself. The Bahir adoption to solve the question of why the just may suffer in this world, while the wicked may be prosperous. The just may have been wicked in former lives, and the wicked righteous. I sort of believe that. If that exists, then that kind of makes sense to me. Additions and commentaries. One of the most accurate manuscripts in the final form of Sefer Bahir was written in 1331 by Meir ben Solomon Abi Sahula. His commentary on Bahir was anonymously published as Or HaGanuz, the Hidden Light. It was translated into German by Gershom Scholem, that guy's big time, and into English by R.D.A. Kaplan. Recently, it has been critically edited by Saverio Campanini. See the Book of Bahir Flavius Mithridates, Latin translation, the Hebrew text, and an English version edited by Saverio Campanini with a foreword by Giulio Busi, Torino, Nino Oregano Editore 2005. Fuck. Right. So following the Bahir and the Zohar, in which the Shekhinah is described as being like a princess in a tower, Frank refers to an actual tower of the Jasna Gora monastery where he was exiled. He had miniature portraits of his daughter Eve made corresponding to other images of that one bitch. These are now in the National Library of Israel. However, Eve as Shekhinah that had not appeared during Frank's lifetime. The Virgin was hidden from Frank, and his task was to free her. The black M points to the true Virgin who will be referred preceding the final redemption. Frank regarded himself as the Virgin's guide, who, before her manifestation, is in a mysterious place and was given only to him since the beginning of the world, so that he, as her father, would be her guardian. The soul of Shekinah was still with Frank. His brothers were unworthy to see her themselves. They were supposed to support Frank in finding the Virgin. Depending on the company's behavior, the Virgin would have would positively or negatively towards them. A well-known idea, descriptions of the Shekhinah. During her father's lifetime, I've been reading for so fucking long. During her father's lifetime, Eve Frank held a special position within the company. As soon as she was old enough, she stood at her father's side as a confidant and adjutant. Frank repeatedly accused his followers of having fallen back into Judaism, thus preventing the liberation of the Virgin. The only way the Virgin was able to adapt, the only way the Virgin is to adapt to the Polish environment. The only way to the Virgin is to adapt to the Polish environment. The liberation of the Shekinah, the transfer of the Shekinah's soul from Jacob to Eve Frank, is also described in some longer fairy tale narratives in the words of Hashem, which are reminiscent of the Middle Eastern models of in the 1001 Nights. They use traditional Kabbalistic terminology with the motive of concealment and disguise as a gardener being important in Frankism. The garden stands for a symbolic setting of the world of the 10th sphere. The strengthening of the third sphere, Chokmah, the male principle, also known as the upper Shekhinah, and leads to the liberation of the lower Shekhinah. In Frank's perception of the Virgin, it is clear how deeply his ideas are rooted in Kabbalah, and despite other influences, the authors of the words of the L, the words of the L and then the O and the R and then the D, was created, uh, who created such colorful parables and allegories required an excellent knowledge of Kabbalistic literature. Dog. All right. Da'at, the mystical goal. The last stage of this is the last one I'm going to show. Okay, no more showing pictures. This is too much. The last stage of the mystical path of Frankism is Da'at, cosmic convergence. Maybe I'll do it in the future. In the Zohar, as well as in Frankism, Da'at describes the mystical place where all 10 spheres are united. It is an apparent sphere, which cosmologically means a concealed knowledge that creates a harmonizing union between two spheres, the male principle of Chokmah and the female principle of Bina. It results from the fusion of these cosmic forces. On a physical level, knowledge means the sexual union of man and woman, which manifests itself in the union of Adam and Eve in Genesis 4:1. It is thus possible to reach Da'at through sexual intercourse. With the help of sexual rights, Jacob Frank wished to reach Da'as on earth, the last step of Jacob's ladder. The knowledge was a higher realization that would bring a deep insight into everything. It was enlightenment and a fresh realization in one. With it would be associated a new name and a new soul. Frank emphasized that all the patriarchs, including Shabtai Zvi, had been unable to enter Da'at because they had not been baptized. To the worthy of entering Da'at, one must first reach the level of Esau, the acceptance of that one thing. Frankism allowed all of its followers to take part in the mystical search of Da'at, but demanded blind obedience to its leader, combined with the complete abandonment of all laws and teachings, which in any case they only appeared to follow. The more blind and radical my true to the motto, the more blind and radical to my the more blind and radical my obedience to Hashem, the more likely and possibility of reaching Da'at after accepting that bullshit. The Frankists strove to complete the personal path of Da'at, which in the end would only be possible for a few select brothers and sisters. The triangle or V of the ladder refers to the three things, but at the same time to the earthly path of the Frankists. By getting rid of all laws and teachings, they degraded themselves and incurred the contempt of society. The V is applied to Edom, Shekhinah, and Da'at, meaning the Frankists should be baptized to reach the cosmic or the tip of the V, the Virgin, who will raise them from the depths of their exile, leading them back to Da'at. The beginning of the entry into um, Da'at will be seen on earth when the Frankists are integrated into non-Jewish society and accepted by the international community. Then the mystical cosmological path will continue. Motherfuckers. Scholarly analysis. Several authorities of Sabbateanism, such as Heinrich Graetz and Alexander Kroschar, were skeptical of the existence of the distinctive Frankist doctrine. According to Gershom Scholem, a 20th century authority on Sabbateism and Kabbalah, Krishna described Frank's sayings as grotesque, comical, and incomprehensible. In the classy essay "Redemption Through Sin," Scholem placed Frankism as later and more radical outgrowth of Sabbateanism. In contrast, James Michelson argues that Frankism was an original theology that was innovative if sinister, that was, in many respects, a departure from the earlier formulations of Sabbateanism. In traditional Sabbatean doctrines, V and often his followers claimed to be able to liberate the sparks of holiness hidden within what seemed to be evil. According to Michelson, Frank attempt to live the problem, not the solution. Instead, Frank claimed that the mixing between holy and unholy was virtuous. Nathaniel Lederberg claims that Frank had a Gnostic philosophy wherein there was a true Hashem whose existence was hidden by Demiurge. The true Hashem could allegedly be revealed only through the destruction of the social and religious structures created by the Demiurge, thus leading to a thorough antinomianism. For Frank, the distinction between good and evil is a product of the world governed by the false god. Lederberg compares Frank's position to that of Friedrich Nietzsche. Frederick. After Jacob Frank's death in 1791, leadership of the Frankist movement passed to his daughter Ua Frank, who had been proclaimed the Holy Virgin and kind of messianic counterpart of her father as early as 1770. Frank had begun preparing her for spiritual leadership while still alive, referring to her in quasi-divine terms. She became a central symbolic figure in the cult's theology, which drew heavily on inversion, sexual ritual, and antinomian reinterpretation of other symbols. He even maintained a court-like following in Offenbach, Germany, where the remaining Frankist elite had taken residence. They continued to act as a quasi-mystical sect, dressing in ornate ceremonial clothing, preserving a secretive hierarchical structure, and perpetuating doctrines inherited from Frank, particularly those related to the sacralization of transgression and the subversion of traditional religious laws. The group engaged in extensive networking with various European aristocratic and clerical circles, especially within the Habsburg court and Polish nobility, often leveraging secrecy and influence rather than overt proselytization. By this time, the Frank identity had largely detached from Judaism altogether. Most adherents had been baptized into other shit decades earlier, not out of theological conviction, but as part of the Jacob Frank strategy to infiltrate and manipulate dominant power structures from within, a tactic central to his doctrine of redemption through sin. E. Frank ruled over the community until her death in 1816. Afterward, the movement gradually disintegrated as a formal sect, but many of its ideological patterns persisted through intermarriage, elite networking, and secret societies. Scholars such as Gershom Scholem and Powell Maciejko have suggested the Frankish descendants may have assimilated into Masonic and esoteric networks. Modern-day references to Frankism. Although Frankism is often considered a historical footnote with Jewish messianic movements, references to it have reemerged in contemporary political and cultural discourse. While some references to Frankism have been labeled as wild shit in academic and media sources, there is a growing scholarly and journalistic debate over whether conflating critique of Frankist ideology with stuff is intellectually sound. This is particularly relevant given the historical record. Jacob Frank and many of his followers ultimately converted to bullshit, aligning themselves with royal courts and secret societies rather than mainstream Jewish life. Some political commentators Frankism as the preferred religion of the elites and associate it with devil worship and modern day inversion rituals. Some researchers argue that careful distinction should be made between Judaism and as a religion and Frankism as a heretical antinomian sect that deliberately broke with traditional Jewish law and identity. As a result, the emerging conversation increasingly focuses on the theological inversion as a political theology rather than as an ethnic or Jewish accusation. Okay, if this one is long, I'm gonna be pissed. Stop, dude. All right, here we go. Nathan of Gaza, and then we're done reading. I gotta read a little more. Okay, Nathan Benjamin ben Elisha Hayim Halevi Ashkenazi. Nathan Benjamin ben Elisa Hayim Halevi Ashkenazi, more famously known as Nathan of Gaza, Nathan Azadi, 1643 to 1680, or Ghazali, was a theologian and author born in Jerusalem. After his marriage in 1663, he moved to Gaza, where he became famous as a prophet for the Jewish Messiah claimant Sabbatai. Okay, there's an engraving from Cornelius Hazat Kerzakov, History, Van Hali were at 1671. Born 1643 in Jerusalem, Ottoman Syria, Ottoman Empire, died 1680, aged 36 to 37, Sofia, Ottoman Empire. Religion, Sabbateanism. Biography. Nathan of Gaza was born in Jerusalem around 1643 to 1644. He died on Friday, January 11th, 1680, in Sofia. He grew up in Jerusalem. His father, Elisha Hayim ben Jacob, was a distinguished rabbinic intellectual who served as an envoy of Jerusalem, collecting donations for impoverished Jews. During his travels, he would distribute Kabbalistic works he obtained in Jerusalem. Upon settling in Ottoman Syria, Elisha Hayim ben Jacob took the surname Ashkenazi as a means of differentiating his family and himself from the largely Sephardic Jews of the empire. He died in Alawid, Morocco in 1673. Before his father's death, Nathan of Gaza began studying Talmud and Kabbalah under Jacob Hagiz. The relationship between these two would continue for many years. Nathan of Gaza would spend most of his life until about 1664 with his teacher at a yeshiva. His studies, he wrote during his studies he wrote of his interest in the persistence during his studies he wrote of his interest in the persistence toward a life as a Jewish academic. Gershom Scholem, a 20 Jewish mysticism, wrote that Nathan was an extremely gifted student of quick attention and brilliant intellect. His talents were noteworthy for their rare combination of intellectual power and capacity for profound thinking with imagination and strong emotional sensitivity. At 19 or 20, he married the daughter of an affluent Jew named Samuel Lisabona. The nuptials were believed to have occurred before the end of 1663 when he joined his wife's family in Gaza. There, he was able to focus considerably on his religious studies. Nathan of Gaza initiated a focused study of Kabbalah and relocating to the area of Gaza. His exploration of Jewish mysticism led to the various His exploration of Jewish mysticism led to various mystical experiences. An example of such experiences is noted in a letter written in 1673. When I attained the age of 20, I began to study the book Zohar and some of the Lurianic writings. According to the Talmud, he who wants to purify himself receives the aid of heaven, and thus he sent me some of his holy angels and blessed spirits who revealed to me many of the mysteries of the Torah. In the same year, my force having been stimulated by the visions of angels and blessed souls, I was undergoing a prolonged fast in the week before the feast of Purim. Having locked myself in a separate room in holiness and purity, the Spirit came over me. My hair stood up on my head, and my my hair stood on end, and my knees shook, and I beheld the Merkaba, and I saw visions of God all day long and night. Merkaba is a school of Jewish mysticism, 100 before the Common Era to 1,000 Common Era, centered on the visions of those found in Ezekiel 1 or in the Hekalo literature, palaces literature, concerning stories of ascents to the heavenly palaces of the throne of God. How long is that? Too long. Oh, too long. We'll do that another time. Nathan's vision lasted approximately 24 hours, and it is reported to have significantly influenced his perception of reality and self-identity. Nathan's vision lasted approximately 24 hours and is reported to have significantly influenced the perception of reality and self-identity. The event was described as overpowering and transformative, marking Nathan's conviction of being a true prophet for the time. Nathan purportedly experienced physical and mental changes, but a crucial aspect of his vision was the belief that Shabbatai Tzvi was the Messiah. This conviction led to Nathan being acknowledged as the first Sabbatean believer, marking the beginning of the Sabbatean movement. Nathan's prophecy regarding Shabbatai Tzvi was not his only one. As the years went by, he experienced many other visions that would support his movement and strengthen the belief in Shabbatai Tzvi. His second vision occurred on the evening of Shavuot in spring of 1665. Nathan was said to have been spiritually possessed by a Maggid, a type of itinerant preacher. During the spiritual takeover, he was observed dancing energetically and emitting a distinct fragrance. The scent mentioned in the Zohar is thought to be linked to the aroma of the Garden of Eden, as well as the prophet Elisha and Isaac Luria. The vision described differs notably from Nathan of Gaza's prophetic awakening. Okay. Yet it exhibits some similarities. One parallel is transformation. Following the end of the Megiddic possession, Nathan of Gaza experienced it, although this was mental. Instead, it involved how he was perceived by the Jewish community, which began to recognize him as a prophet and spiritual doctor. This public recognition of Nathan of Gaza was a mystic and seer, facilitated by the subsequent acceptance of Shabbatai Tzvi as a messianic figure. The use of prophecies was central to the movement, with numerous predictions made by Nathan of Gaza and Shabbatai Tzvi contributing to the emergence of Shabbatean followers and within the contemporary Jewish community. Nathan of Gaza envisioned Shabbatai Tzvi as the Messiah of the Jewish people, but Tzvi's acceptance of his messianic role was not instantaneous. His first encounter with Nathan of Gaza was not about his position as the Jewish Messiah, but rather as a patient to a physician. At the time, Nathan of Gaza was becoming well known as a spiritual physician. Shabbatai Tzvi visited him in hopes of curing him from an illness that he had contracted. Shkolem would later write that Tzvi suffered from a psychological condition he identified as manic depressive psychosis, today called BPD, or something BD. I don't know. Instead of trying to aid with his psychological sickness, Nathan of Gaza divulged to Shabbatai Zvi his prophetic vision. Initially, when Nathan addressed him as the Messiah, he laughed at him and said, "I had it the messianic vocation, but have sent it away." Intensive discussions led to Nathan of Gaza persuading Shabbatai Zvi to accept a messianic mission. In May of 1665, Shabbatai Zvi publicly declared himself the true savior and positioned himself as and positioned him and Nathan of Gaza prominently in the public eye. In December 1665, Shabtai Zvi and Nathan of Gaza parted ways. Shabtai Zvi embarked on his journey to Turkey, where he would begin to advocate his newfound position as the Mashiach. They would not see each other again until after Shabtai Zvi later conversion to Islam. Thus, from the fall of 1665 until the summer of 1666, the two worked arduously on the next stage of their movement, convincing the world that Shabtai Zvi was the Messiah. Seeing that the rabbis of Jerusalem were very hostile to the Sabbatean movement, Nathan proclaimed Gaza to be henceforth the holy city. He first spread the word about Messiah's fame by sending circulars from Ottoman Syria to the most important communities in Europe. Then he visited several of the chief cities in Europe, Africa, and India, and finally returned to Ottoman Syria. Even after Shabtai Zvi's apostasy, Nathan did not desert his cause, but unsafe to remain in Ottoman Syria any longer, he made preparations to go to Smyrna. Seeing that the credulous were confirmed anew in their belief, the rabbis excommunicated all Sabbateans, particularly Nathan, 9th December 1666, warning everybody against harboring or even approaching him. After a stay of a few months at Smyrna, he went at the end of April 1667 to Adrianople, where, despite his written promise that he would remain quiet, he continued his agitation. He urged the Sabbateans and Adrianople to proclaim their adhesion to the cause by abolishing the fasts of the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Ab. Travels through Europe. Again, excommunicated at Adrianople, he went with his few followers to Thessaloniki. There he met with scant welcome, but had more success in the communities of Chios and Corfu. From Corfu, he went to Venice, March of 1668, where the rabbinate and the council of the city compelled him to give them a written confession that all his prophecies were the production of his imagination. The confession was published, whereupon Abraham Yakini, the originator of the Sabbatean movement, wrote Nathan a letter in which he sympathized with him over his persecution and expressed his indignation at the acts of the Venetian rabbinate. The Venetian Jews then introduced Nathan to set out for Livorno, where the Jewish population was known to be inimical to him. They sent an escort with him ostensibly as a mark of honor, but in reality to prevent him from going elsewhere. He divided their motives in sending him to Livorno, however, and succeeding in eluding his escort, proceeded to Rome. In spite of his disguise, he was recognized there and was banished from the city. He then went to Livorno voluntarily and even there made converts to his cause. From Livorno, he returned to Adrianople and seems to have spent the remainder of his days in travel. Works. Nathan of Gaza persuaded the Jewish community through his writings about Shabbatai Zvi and Sabbateanism. He composed various letters and other written documents and promoted an entirely new kind of theology, one that merged the current notations of Kabbalah of the time and elements of Lurianic mysticism, a subject that he studied when he was younger. In addition to creating a type of mysticism, and in addition to creating a new type of mysticism, he also composed a document entitled Derush Ta'aninim, Discourse on the Dragons, published by Shkolem in Belquot Mashiach, Jerusalem, 1944. This article stressed the notion of a new law in which the old positive and negative commandments of the Torah were eliminated. The This became the basis for the Gershom Sholem called Shabbatian antinomianism. Not only did Nathan of Gaza publish documents that advocated for a change and a removal of Jewish laws and commandments, but he also composed various texts that discuss concepts entirely different from these unorthodoxies. For example, he wrote Hadrat Kodesh, Constantinople, 1735, a Kabbalistic commentary on the book of Genesis, particularly for the aspect of creation. Several years later, Nathan of Gaza published Ozar Nehemad, Venice, 1738, a supplement to the Hadrat Kodesh. As evident from the as evident from these alternative spiritual manuscripts, Nathan of Gaza was not solely a devout Shabbatian follower and believer. He strived to provide an alternative perspective and understanding of Judaism. He also wrote Peri Etz Hadar, prayers for Bishvat, around 1753, and Tikkun Quera, an ascetic work according to Sabbatean doctrines, Amsterdam, 1666. His travels were translated into German by Moritz Horszlewski and published in Orient Lit. 9, 170 to 172, 299 to 301. Overall, the documents Nathan of Gaza produced and presented were both positively and negatively received by the Jewish community. For example, some of the rabbis in Jerusalem were divided over the ideas Nathan of Gaza wrote. A number of them felt that the records were sacrilegious, basic tenets of the Jewish faith. Nevertheless, the composition of these texts provided a further platform in which Shabbatai Tzvi and Nathan of Gaza could promote their Sabbatean ideologies. That there is some consensus among the sources that on Friday, January 11th, 1680, in Ushkit, Ottoman Empire, now Skopje, North Macedonia, Nathan of Gaza died. However, according to the other sources, he died in Sofia, now Bulgaria, but his body was transferred to Uskop and buried there. According to the Jewish physician Jacques Confino, who visited Skopje in the 1930s, Nathan of Gaza was buried in a marble tomb along with a disciple. According to Confino, the tomb was engraved in Hebrew with the inscription, the eternal home of all living beings, the monument of rest of the Lord's of Hashem's servant, uh, awakens and dedicates heavenly glory to him. I did not sing his praises extensively because to him belong tranquility and glory. Our reverend teacher and Rabbi Abraham Benjamin Nathan Ashkenazi, may he rest in paradise, who was invited into the Celestial Yeshiva on Tuesday, the 16th of the month of Shvat in the year 5540. May his soul be bound in the bundle of life. His burial place became a uh, pilgrimage site after his death. Many Jews believe that Nathan's grave had supernatural qualities. In one legend told by Rabbi Chaim Palachi, Shabbatai Ventura was punished with swelling in the hands and a rash after refusing to honor the grave during the visit. After refusing to honor the grave during a visit to the Skopje cemetery, according to the legend, the illness was miraculously healed after he returned to the grave and vowed to pray for Nathan of Gaza's soul. The tomb survived only until World War II when it was destroyed. Dog, I have read for 2 fucking hours. There have been like 40 false messiahs since like ever. Can you just name them for me? Or however, and just number with the name and the years. That's it. Below is a concise historical list of Jewish false-veiled Messianic movements. The impressive approximate years there have been dozens more minor local. By Simona Petria, 4 before the Common Era, Anthrogenes, 4 to 2 BCE, Judas of Galilee, 6 CE, Theudas, 44 to 46, Menahem ben Judah, 66, Shimon bar Giora, 66 to 70, John of Gishala, 67 to 70, Bar Kokhba, Simon bar Kokhba, 132 to 135, Moses of Crete, 4440, Abu Isha al Ifshani, 684 to 705, Yogdan, disciple of Abu Isa, early 700s, Serene, Syria, 720, David Alroy, Menachem ben Solomon, 1160, Moses Botaro, 1413, Asher Lamlin, 1500 to 1502, David Revueni, 1523 to 1532, Solomon Malko, 1529 to 1532. The dates are Common Era, and that's when they're followers or whatever. That's when they were doing their shit. Abraham ben Eliezer Halevi, early 1500s. Shlomo ben Yosef, Persia, 1640. Shabbatai Zvi, 1648, 1666. Nathan of Gaza, prophet of Shabbatai, 65 to 1667. Baruchia Russo, Osman Baba, late 1600s. Jacob Carid, 1690 to 1700. Nehemiah ben Moses Hayun, early 1700s. Jonathan Eibosholtz, accused, disputed, 1750. Jacob Frank, 1755 to 1791. Mordechai Mokiak, 1860s. Joseph Priaso, Bohemia, early 1800s. Judah ben Shalom, Yemen, 1868 to 1874. Shokar Kodai, 1861 1865. Shokar Kodai II, 1870s. Moses Gabbai, Tripoli, late 1800s. Rabbi Yosef D. Rhina, legendary attempted 1400s attempted Messianic act. All right, that's it. Fuck all this shit. You're fired. Go fuck yourself.